optimal altitude. Please put your body, mind, and soul in the upright position. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Welcome to WAYSPACE. This is it. Here we are. Let's be here. Now. How are you? How are you doing? I'm doing okay. I had a rough week last week. You know, it was... It certainly culminated in the last episode, in an episode that I titled it as if it was about burnout, but it was burnout, that I recorded it in the midst of burnout. And I learned something, though. I mean, I've learned a lot of things, but one thing I learned was that the lack of preparation in some ways makes the podcast even more fulfilling for me and beneficial to me, helpful to me. And I think as well as, my friends, supporters, listeners, audience, I think it's something that going forward I want to embrace. I want to embrace the not necessarily not having any idea about what I'm going to talk about, but being really open to just saying whatever is going to be said. And I've definitely been that way from the beginning, but I think it's something I want to continue, because as I get further into this podcast, and now this is episode 7, I'm starting to experience what it's like to receive feedback. And for the most part, it's really positive feedback. I mean, this is the kind of thing where it's like, what kind of to have negative feedback about like a podcast like this, you'd have to have a sense of what I'm trying to do. And what I'm trying to do is just this, it's just this. Like, I don't have another motive per se. I mean, if I had a lot more listeners, that'd be cool, but not necessarily, it's sort of the purpose of the podcast is being fulfilled right now as I do this. And in the same way, the purpose of you listening to it in many ways is just right now, you listening to it. And that could change over time. I mean, I don't know ultimately what your purpose is for listening to this podcast, whether it's to support me because you know me or love me or care about me, or because you actually, maybe don't know me super well, but you get something out of listening to it. Any reason, or maybe both or neither or whatever. But I know for me, it's become quickly becoming a way for me to engage with myself in a really sincere and honest way. Not unlike my morning pages, those 3 pages of stream of consciousness I do every morning. Or today, to be honest, I did like a page late afternoon at like 4 p.m. and then 2 more of the pages like maybe an hour and a half ago. So, and right now it's like midnight, going from Sunday into Monday. So, it's not to say I do my morning pages in the morning every day. And that actually, it's kind of funny how that works. But that's kind of what I want to talk about in this episode, which is where I'm at with my practice, my spiritual practice. But, it's my practices, and where I'm feel like I'm headed with it, and just where I feel like I'm at. Because, in some ways I feel like with my practice, it's something that I feel a little bit silly analyzing it so much and overanalyzing it, or feel like it's overanalyzing. But then I think, like, I don't know, maybe that's analysis and overanalyzing and thinking a lot about something. Maybe that's just part of the way that I do my practice. That's the way I've grown up. I've grown up thinking. I've grown up analyzing things. I've grown up noticing things and then analyzing the noticing. And it's not to say that I that's the way that I should be or something, but it's certainly the way that I am. And where I'm at with my practice right now is really going to some pretty radical places of accepting myself as I am and accepting everybody as they are, accepting our world as it is, accepting those around me as they are, my loved ones exactly as they are, my friends exactly as they are, strangers exactly as they are, and just entering into any situation with a sense of wonder about just how somebody's doing and why they're doing that way, and what goes into sort of the phenomenon that is their sort of existence and the way that they treat others, whether for better or for worse, whether it's good or bad or whatever, just what has gone into that and how is it a manifestation of, the same light, the same universe that I'm a manifestation of. So I guess I want to backtrack a little bit. That kind of just got me into some places to think about some things, but I want to backtrack a little bit to basically what has the past week been like for me, and sort of getting into territory where I feel like what I'm doing is updating you, particularly because now I'm seeing that I can record these like on Sunday right before they release on Monday morning. And I think even though it is kind of coming up to the wire or whatever, it feels really good because it feels like then when you're hearing this, it's pretty much exactly how I'm doing. And it's super recent and as like momentarily present as possible, both in a present sense in terms of me offering you my full attention and offering myself my full attention, but also so that as you're listening to this, you're like, oh, this was him like hours ago talking, I think that's helpful, and I find it to be helpful to feel like that's where the connection is, so that there's less of a lag. But yeah, so what has the past week been like? It's been interesting. Ironically, I actually hadn't seen my therapist in 3 or 4 months. And in the weirdest way, on Monday last week when the podcast came out, it had just been after the weekend of me recording the podcast and feeling the way I was feeling, just incredibly depressed. And I had just happened to see my therapist after 3 or 4 months. It was just scheduled. It had been scheduled for a while that I was just going to go 3 months without going to any appointments. And so I went, and it was very interesting. It was very much so. It felt to me like I went through everything that I had been feeling. I talked about a lot of things. I did a lot of catch up about kind of what the last 3 to 4 months of my life have been like. And yeah, it was cool. I caught her up on everything, and or at least everything that seemed relevant in the moment. It can't really be everything when it's just an hour. But what I felt like I came to, and with her help, was this understanding that I then gained like other moments in the week about like this same aspect of things, but it started, this understanding or perspective started on Monday with this appointment, which was basically that I felt like I engaged in habits like staying up late, like watching TV really late to avoid having to sort of go to sleep at a particular time when I was actually tired, but I didn't want to have to wake up for the next day to face the next day. A way of turning to food, because I didn't have the capacity to just feel my emotions as they were, because there was such a lack of clarity. So a lot of things that I kind of talked about in the last episode, that just scared me, because I felt I felt so fearful of falling back into old patterns and having them take over, and losing my sense of sort of spiritual autonomy as I see it now. Um, and so in that sort of fear of it, and talking about it, I worked through it quickly. I kind of was like, okay, this is what this means. This is what this means. I could tell that I was hiding. I could tell that I was avoiding. I could tell that this is the way that I was processing this. And it was sort of like, it wasn't like a going through the motions thing. It was actually the opposite. It was more like, I've been here before. Yep. I've been here before. Yeah. I want to know what this means. This is concerning me. And it felt like I wasn't wasting time thinking that, I don't know, not to say any way that I could have been doing it would have been wasting time, but I felt like I was ready to just get through the bullshit and just get to the healing that needed to be done. And it did. I mean, the podcast episode in and of itself was such a healing process for me to record. Oh my God. And I mean, I was crying during the episode. There are times I feel like the mic doesn't always pick it up, but there are just times where I had to pause because I was crying, and that emotional release is very healing, at least for me. And I think during that session in therapy, and then later in the week, I think it was just a couple days ago, I was listening to a podcast. There's a podcast I really enjoy called Synchronicity. It's by Noah Lampert. And I'm not quite as consistent of a listener with every podcast nowadays, but there was a while where I was really into it, and I was like really enjoying the format and really felt like inspired by it. And that in many ways I've adopted my own version of the format. I think I'm taking it into the places where I want to take it now, because I'm sort of in my own place. Like I'm like, here I am learning how to do everything, and I'm just alone. I don't have any guests, at least not yet. We'll see. And so on this podcast, he said something great about, and this relates to the spiral, which is like, I'm totally into the spiral. I have it as my logo. I have it in so many places in order to, as imagery, in order for me to remember that that's what this life is, this practice, this reality. All of it is a spiral, in the sense that the spiral, it kind of works in a myriad of ways. In one sense, you could say the spiral is going inward. And so as you go in and you turn a corner to go in, it may feel like you're actually going further away from the innermost part of yourself. But in reality, what's happening is you're going in a spiral. The other way to think of it is that it's a spiral ascending upwards and going in at the same time, which I think that's probably the most helpful imagery. That's usually the imagery that pops up in my head when I think of the spiral, which is that as you are ascending, but it's not a straight line up. It couldn't be. That's just not the way that our reality works, really. I mean, there are some ways. I mean, in some sense, I guess, like, maybe a monastic tradition of some kind would be presented like, here is a spiral that is the most straight that you could possibly get it. But I don't know if that's even really the point. I think it's going to be a spiral regardless of what you do. The question is just how quickly, how much you magnetize to the top or something. But the way that the spiral works is, yes, it's that going inner and going inside, bringing the sort of the circumference of the spiral in and in and in and in and in. But it's also about going up. And so as you go up, there are points on the spiral where you may get to a similar spot, like, 25% of the way around on the right side of the spiral. But now I'm at a higher level. And I don't necessarily mean higher like it's better, but just that I have gained new perspective and traversed areas and paths that I hadn't before. And so there's no way in which I have lost anything. I haven't. None of us have, because we just continue along this spiral. And so every experience we have, even if I come back to the same kinds of patterns, I put things off. Like this week, that's another thing going on right now. Like I'm totally avoiding some of the work that I know I have to do. I've got to prepare just like basically like a press kit, some assets for a show that I just booked for the end of August. And it's like, I enjoy this stuff, but it's work, I guess, at this point, and it's also like one of my first shows back. So like that brings some, anxiety. I feel like, to me, it's some nervousness. It's a little bit of like, should I even play these shows? Should I do shows anymore? Do I want to? I don't know, I'm sure that I'll have a different perspective on that when I actually get to play the show and see what it's like. I should give myself the chance. But yeah, like I'm avoiding things. I'm getting texts and it's like, I just don't have the energy to respond right now. And so I put it off. And then, it's that kind of a sort of procrastinatory vibe, and I've experienced this so many times in my life. And I mean, here's an opportunity where if I can recognize that I'm, on this spiral of ascendance that all of us are on, we've all got our own spiral of ascendance that we're walking up. We're either walking up the stairs, up the spiral, or we're floating, or however you want to think about it. We got a jetpack, whatever. That in a moment like this where I'm procrastinating a little bit of freelance work maybe that I thought I should get done this weekend, I can recognize that, okay, like maybe this isn't from where I'm standing now at this part of my spiral path, this part of the path, this part of my practice, whatever, is that what's happening is not just procrastination or not just the way that I've always thought about it, that there's a lot more that has always gone on when I've experienced this kind of perspective on my work and my life and my responsibilities. And what it also serves as is a way for me to detach a little bit from the responsibilities that I have, so that I can appreciate an aspect of my relationship to myself that I don't get to have when I'm, doing my work in that sort of, not mundane necessarily, but a more mundane way, or a way where I don't feel as connected to my practice. And I think I can always be connected to my practice. I have ways of doing that. I have the mantra in my head. I have plenty of things. But there is something to be said for today, me waking up and deciding not to rush to do any of the work that I thought I was going to do today, and not doing any of it. The only thing I'm doing today that I was thinking that I should do today is recording this podcast. And that's because I realized that this podcast is not work like that. It is an extension of my practice in a very intentional way. Not just an extension of my practice, like I could find a way to see how it's a learning experience or something like that. But it really, really, truly is an extension of my practice and has been that way from the very beginning. So that being said, I sort of took this day as just a day to really engage with myself and be present with myself, like actually feel like, I've got time. I woke up and I just knew that I wanted to meditate. And I was like, I normally do my pages first thing as soon as I wake up, but, like maybe I'll just do what I want to do. I don't have to do it exactly the same every time. Sort of that a change in practice and a change in format can be that extra aspect of discipline that is just as important as the discipline itself. I think in my life that's been the case, because when I get incredibly disciplined and feel like if I miss one aspect of the discipline, when I do miss it, I get fucked. I'm like so screwed. I feel so like I ruined it all and my streak is done and it's terrible. Like I for a while on my meditation app, I just use Insight Timer, and I don't like pay for a subscription or anything, but I just like use the timer, and there's a tracker, and I remember I had the last time that I was tracking my meditations, I was doing just sitting meditation every day, and I think I had 99 days in a row, and on the 100th day I didn't meditate. I just let it go. And I was like, fuck. I was so like, and then I was just like, this whole thing of keeping a streak of my meditations, it just felt like, for me, it just felt like I don't need to add that into my practice, trying to like keep track of things like that. Like maybe I can just like meditate, try, aim to meditate every day, because I do. I mean, it's like I've talked about before. It's like brushing my teeth or taking a shower or something, but I don't shower every single day. And even though maybe my ideal is to shower every day, I guess I don't. There are days where I don't shower. And I just accept that as a part of my life. That it's not. It doesn't have. Nothing has to be an every single day kind of thing. And meditation is that. I think if I want to have a truly sustainable and consistent meditation practice, I have to accept that there are going to be days that I don't meditate. And that doesn't make me any less meditative. That it, even really the days that I don't meditate, it gives me an appreciation for finding what is meditative in the sort of happenings of my day. And I think that's really, really valuable. It's shown me a lot, actually. The finding ways to see in my days that I don't get the time to sit and do meditation on my cushion, to like really appreciate the moments where it really does still feel like meditation, and make it so. So, yeah. All right. So I kind of have been talking about the past week. I've been talking about where I feel like I'm at with my practice. I feel like I want to think about, what can I say to myself, say to you, say to someone, but say to myself when I started. Not when I started life, or when I started whatever my mission is here on Earth, or any of that. In many ways, I just thinking about what I could tell myself at the beginning of when I felt like I was starting a practice, which was shortly after I read Be Here Now, because I think Be Here Now, it's a book that was illustrated and made out of talks that Ram Dass gave when he first came back from India in 1969, I think. 1969 or 1970. Pretty sure it was 1969. And he had just experienced what can happen when you really embark in spiritual practice in a all-encompassing kind of a way. And his perspectives on it, very clearly to me, I see from reading all of his material or a lot of his material over the course of his life, and listening to it, and then reading his memoir, because he's been totally a influential figure in my practice, particularly at the beginning, is that what I would tell myself at the beginning when I was first exposing myself to that and embarking on my practice and being like, all right, my diet's changing, and it did change a lot, all for the better, pretty much. I began doing yoga much, much more often, which I don't do quite as often now, but I still find it to be just as valuable, and I would like to do it more. But I'm, being patient with myself. And then meditation, of course, and other things, is I think I would want to tell myself, I would say, Jack, you're not going to get away from the stuff that sucks. It might feel like you do. And if it feels like your spiritual practice is letting you get away from the stuff that sucks, then those parts of your spiritual practice you're going to have to let go of. Because on the path, on the spiral, you are going to face the same shit again and again and again. And it's going to be different every time, which is fucking awesome. And it gets better every time, which is fucking awesome. But it is still the same shit. And until it's not the same shit, until your perspective on it is so drastically different from the beginning that it's not the same shit anymore. But that's not really, I don't know how helpful that would be to myself back then. And myself now. I think it's important to recognize that it is both a much faster process than you can anticipate and also a much slower process than you would like. I don't know how that can both be true, but I have experienced both to be true. And I think it has to do with the way that my perspective as whatever I want to call myself, a practitioner, I like that as opposed. I don't know if I've ever described myself as a seeker before, but I like practitioner better because I think practitioner feels like a more deeper understanding of the way that this works. I think when I am particularly disgruntled and upset with having to deal with the same shit, the difficult shit, I feel like I'm more of a seeker. And when I'm more respectful about my sort of my life situation and the things that are part of my life curriculum, I think I'm more of a practitioner. I think that's the word that would be more beneficial to me because I am a seeker in that I'm seeking practices as a practitioner, but to say that I'm a seeker feels a little bit incomplete, as if I am forgetting about how important my practice is and that I am practicing things. I'm not just seeking like, oh, I want the answer to this. As much as I would love it. I can accept that I would love the answers. But the answers are not something that you can ask for in that kind of a way and then are just given to you. They're something that are revealed to you through practice, and they're experienced through practice. They're experienced as a reality that just reveals itself to you in many ways as yourself through practice. And yeah, and I think that, you know, I don't want it to feel to myself, you know, if I'm speaking to myself back then and hearing this from myself later when I'm in a particularly disgruntled state and like, fuck, do I have to deal with this shit again? I just wanted to escape. I wanted to escape all the pain and the suffering and the just bullshit that I would have to deal with. I thought that by detaching from everything, I could get away from it all, which is like, oh God, that's just another fantasy, dude. And it's okay. The fantasies can be really helpful. They can be exciting and interesting, but ultimately the fantasies are just another form of practice. And what we're practicing is presence in many different forms, presence in tons of forms. And all the forms that interest you should be explored. There's no reason not to explore them, but to always recognize that if we want to say that the name of the game is you're burning through your karma, then burning through your karma doesn't mean you get to just have your karma there and say goodbye to it. It doesn't work like that unless, I mean, see, it's weird because I also don't want to say that something just can't work like that, because it can kind of work however it's going to work if you can not just believe it, but actually live as if it were the case in a totally sincere way. But for me, I just can tell that, like, what my soul is wanting is to learn and to feel like I'm really learning and to feel like I'm really accepting. And that's hard to accept, but I can accept it. I can accept that I really want to learn these lessons, that I really believe that these lessons are worth it, that I believe that I'm worth it, that I believe that being a part of the world is worth it, and not getting away from what is difficult is worth it. And that's going to mean a lot of avoidance, because these are the lessons I'm learning, and I'm doing some avoiding as we speak. Not as I speak in this. I mean, maybe. No, not really. I mean, I'm just talking off the cuff. I'm speaking as sincerely as I feel like I can. But just in terms of avoiding certain tasks and work that I've got to do. But I don't know. Maybe I'm not avoiding it. Maybe I don't know. I don't know if I want that to be the whole story anymore. That I'm just this guy that avoids stuff. Maybe I'm prioritizing things and I can take credit for that. I can take responsibility. I can take responsibility for prioritizing things in my life and in my experience, as opposed to thinking about it like I'm just avoiding shit. Because that is quite a way to drop out of the responsibility that I have over myself, my life, and my autonomy. And it's a way to blame myself and use shame that is just not helpful at a certain point. Yeah, see what I mean? That recognition, that's higher up on the spiral thing. That's not something that oh my God, this is good. Okay, cool. Just be aware to past Jack or whatever, or you listening, that like the way this works is it gets better because you experience the wisdom that you have been working so hard for. And it's in moments like this that you see, after the difficulty, when the difficulty is still among you, but it's also not quite as stark and terrible, because you've accepted it a bit, that you see the fruits of your labor, of your practice. It's that in moments like these, you feel much more grounded and you feel more able to figure out what you want to do next, and not so in the dark because you've allowed more light in. Yeah. So, all right. So at this point, I want to think about, just before I kind of finish up here for today's kind of update podcast. I still haven't figured out a title to this. Maybe it'll come to me before the end. But if not, I'll think of it before I post, of course. Where do I see myself headed? Ooh. Just like last week. I have these questions that make me just feel like, oh God, really? And I'm the one who wrote them. It's like, where do I see myself headed? I see myself headed to a place of more acceptance. More and more acceptance of just the way that things are. Accepting myself the way I am. Accepting everyone in my life the way that they are. Which doesn't mean being, like a doormat or something. Or, just, it doesn't mean I just like allow anything and everything. I mean, in some sense it does, but acceptance means that I allow myself. It's not allowance of others, sort of in a way that disregards my own experience. It's a way that honors all of our experiences, particularly my own. So I see myself headed there to greater and deeper, not just greater acceptance, deeper acceptance, deeper and deeper acceptance. I see my meditation practice continuing. I see many of my practices continuing, consolidating. I can feel that I'm taking stock right now. My energy is definitely lower. I feel less energized. I feel more tired. I feel that more avoidant aspect that I was talking about, which is, I say avoidant, but I think it's a situation in which I experience what it's like to have less energy. And it manifests as what appears to be avoidance, but I think if I understand it more deeply, it's that I'm tired and I deserve some rest, like all of us deserve rest. So I see myself headed in that direction of taking stock, of giving myself resting time, so that I can do the things that I want to do and not do the things that I don't want to do. Yeah. Where else do I see myself headed? I think I see myself headed toward rediscovering things about the practices and the traditions that I've come across. I was reading a book that I got like over a year ago. I got a bunch of Chogyam Trungpa's books after I read Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, because it really just made me feel insecure and like burst my bubble when I was going through sort of Ram Dass's teachings. And then Trungpa kind of like was this figure that was both close to Ram Dass and they worked together and taught together, but also just, popped the bubble on many of the ways that I was associating with spiritual practice and my excitement about it and my interest and my curiosity and my wonder. And it touched me in a way that both made me upset, but also made me feel like I want to continue this. This is valuable. This is really valuable to me. And I felt like I wanted to honor that. And so I cracked open a couple of his books today, but in particular one of his books, which was it's the third in a series of 3, where he begins in the first book with Hinayana Buddhism, which is they call it the lower vehicle, the smaller vehicle, and it's basically individual liberation. So it's like, sort of in some ways you could say like Buddhism in the traditional sense. Like when you think of Buddhism, if you have any exposure to it, it's like the Four Noble Truths and then the Eightfold Path. You just like, you do what you do so that you can awaken, and that's it. And then this is the tool for awakening. It's the way to heal the shit that got screwed up, your confusion basically about what your existence is, that you are not an ego human being thing, that there is a human body, but you don't really exist. But realizing that you don't exist in the way that you thought you did is liberation. It's awakening. It's transcendence, and it's in many ways the end of suffering. And yet there's still suffering. But anyway, I could talk about that longer. But the second book all has to do with Mahayana Buddhism, which is that's the bigger vehicle, so to speak, and it has to do with taking the bodhisattva vow and recognizing that your own liberation is not enough, that your own liberation is ultimately not really complete without the liberation of those around you and those whose lives you can affect. And so it's about learning how to be able to take on other people's suffering and both allow your light to not be darkened, but also help them polish off their mirror, so to speak, or get the darkness out of their view so that their experience of life is brighter as well. And then the third book, which is the book that I was reading today, is Vajrayana Buddhism, which is the third yana, obviously, and it's basically, it's sort of he describes it as like the third step, the culmination of the point of all of it, that not a lot of people get to or want to or think is even worthwhile. Some people think it's blasphemous, I'm pretty sure. which is sort of taking everything in your life and turning it. It's like transmuting every single thing. A lot of people have described this kind of way of doing things as like the left-handed path, and I can't say too much about it. I mean, I'm aware of it, and I have other books on Vajrayana Buddhism, and this is all Tibetan Buddhist lineage, but it's particularly interesting, and it feels very valuable to me as a Westerner, as somebody who is like, I'm not going to go into like a monastic tradition most likely and just gain, or gain just awaken individually, and that's it. I'm not going to experience awakening that way. That to me is like, that's like a fantasy that makes me feel excited about continuing practice, but it's not ultimately something that I think I really want. And then the Bodhisattva path is beautiful and it's wonderful, and I think it's a part of it. And that's what he talks about, is that both the Hinayana and the Mahayana those practices are a part of Vajrayana, but Vajrayana also holds the paradox of like, basically like what appears to be contradictory to the Mahayana path or the Hinayana path or both is not actually contradictory, and it's very much allows for paradox, allows for he calls crazy wisdom, which I love, which is sort of it's like it's interesting. There's not too much that I can say about it. I would just say, study Chogyam Trungpa and Vajrayana Buddhism, because it's very interesting, and there are other ways to study Vajrayana Buddhism. It's just the way that I'm engaging with it right now. But yeah, and I something that I've been thinking about in relation to that, and this is part of where I'm headed, at least today. I mean, I have other things, like there's this one book called Emmanuel's Book that I've been reading that's really been wonderful, that I think I'm thinking about actually recording an audiobook of that, like myself, just for me. And if people want to hear it, but I don't know how that would work, reading somebody else's book. But I hadn't found an audiobook, so I was thinking like that would be a great practice for me to do that for myself. But anyway, what I've been feeling like is that I do practices that feel like the Hinayana path. I do practices that feel like the Bodhisattva path. And then I feel like I've been learning the Vajrayana path as well. And I don't mean to say that I'm honoring the lineage and doing what needs to be done, and I do all the hell fucking no. Like I'm not even going to pretend like I'm doing all of that. But as a way of understanding my path, I can feel that I'm not just doing the individual liberation path. I didn't leave everything in the world to go become enlightened. I didn't do that. And I didn't do that because I guess it's really just that I don't want to. Ultimately, I just don't want to. And I could spend time talking like, oh, if I just had the ultimate solitude, I'd be totally happy. But I don't think I would, because I'm not there. So clearly I don't really want it. And so then there's the Bodhisattva path. And I think in many ways I've been experiencing what that's like as well. I think all of us experience this, by the way. There's no holier than thou kind of thing. I'm talking about like my practices reflect these paths, and these paths are a very helpful way of understanding one's practice, regardless of what tradition you're in. I think it's just like a beautiful like way. The way he talks about it is a beautiful way of understanding the way one can engage in practice. So I have these paths that act upon my individual liberation, like sitting meditation, for example. But then I have things that are engaged with like the Bodhisattva path, which is me understanding, the pain and the suffering of my ancestors and how that relates to my life, and how it is intertwined, and how I'm not just interested in freeing myself, but freeing those in my ancestry and in my, my own family lineage and in my family from the suffering that they deal with, and that freeing my suffering is necessarily intertwined with theirs because we've been intertwined from the start. And that to me feels like when I'm engaged in practices that help me to do that, that feels like the Bodhisattva path. And then, so then the Vajrayana path, which is like this transmuting of everything in my life, that whether the way I act looks to be super, loving and all that or not, that there are circumstances in which, for example, if somebody is not treating me well, to respond with a no or to respond with anger. Not that I get angry, but I'm just kind of using an example. I mean, I'm working on this, but just like responding in a way that opens us up to greater awakening and awareness and light, even if it looks to be like uncomfortable and like really uncomfortable, particularly for me. That to me is Vajrayana. That to me is that to me is the Vajrayana like path. That to me is the path of, as he describes it, indestructible wakefulness, that you don't take any opportunity to escape what is in the present moment as it is. And that's very difficult. I mean, sitting in meditation is hard, like allowing one's thoughts and just, and coming back to the breath or coming back to just awareness or what have you, that can be hard. Don't get me wrong. That can be hard. Being able to take on other people's suffering, but not take it actually on karmically, and to just experience other suffering and be there for them and meet that with love, but also retain your light. That's really fucking hard. But both of those things you can do with a sort of a degree of avoidance in a way, where you can orient your life so that you avoid certain circumstances, particularly with Hinayana. Like, it's like if I don't want to, if I have an issue with drinking and I don't want to drink anymore, or for example, I'll speak more from my actual experience. Like if I don't want to, I haven't been smoking weed the last few months, and it's been a wonderful change. And so, if I feel like I have a psychological addiction to weed and I'm like nowhere around it, and I stop talking to anybody that smokes weed and I'm away from it completely, that's a good move. That feels Hinayana like. That feels like I'm getting away from it so that I don't have to deal with it. Then sort of the Bodhisattva would be like, if I like was around people that I was giving back. So I don't smoke any weed anymore, and I talk to people about quitting so that they don't have to smoke weed anymore. Now the Vajrayana would be like if I said, yeah, weed has been a source of heightened anxiety and not been helpful to my life, but weed doesn't have to be that way, and I could smoke weed sometimes and that'd probably be fine. And I'd be okay. And I don't know 100%, but I'm going to work on my practices so that I know how to be okay without it. I know how to help others talk about how it can be beneficial or harmful to them. And I also recognize that even if I don't have total certainty about how it's going to be in the future, I'm opening myself to the freedom to have the experience of it being harmful to me again. And so that I don't have any delusion about it, that I am ultimately, when I get really down to it, free from all of the addictions that I could have. And that to me, like when I describe it that way, that feels appropriate to it, because it feels like Vajrayana is like, and in what I just said about like the psychological addiction to weed is like that's a bit of a radical stance to have. I mean, we have this idea that like once an addict, always an addict, or like that's totally a prevailing narrative in our society. and I don't want to take away from that if that's been beneficial to people, or to you. And so what I mean to say is that it's just radical. It's I mean, it's like he talks about, like, you know, now in Vajrayana, you've been doing Hinayana and then Mahayana, like no non-killing. Now eat some meat and drink some liquor. Like, you know, it's like that kind of thing. Like eat meat, drink liquor, have sex, that kind of shit, you know? And see that it's all you don't have to be pure in the way of the earlier paths, you could say, or not even earlier, because they're all concurrent, at least in my experience. The way that I'm experiencing these ways of being and relating to reality, it's all concurrent, but that you are now recognizing not just the purity and the sacredness of, like, love in the sense of, like, empathy for people or compassion, but the sacredness and the purity of everything. That everything is sacred. Every single thing. All of it. Everything that exists the way it is sacred in and of itself. And to me, that just feels like, fuck, yeah, that is paradoxical, but it is the extent of the deepest compassion that you could possibly have, is that everything is beautiful and pure and sacred in itself, as it is, as you are, as I am, in our everyday lives, and that we're already awake. We're already awake, and it's honoring that. And yeah, and I'm still working through it, but that's kind of where I feel like I'm headed right now. And I don't mean to say that where I'm headed is like, okay, I'm just going down into Buddhism, but I'm just going more deeply into the things that have given me the stepping stones of my path. And so Buddhism is certainly one of those. Taoism is also one of those, which I've come upon a lot. That kind of just sticks with me all the time. I mean, they all do. And then I'm sure at a certain point I'll go back into Christian mysticism, particularly with Neville Goddard, and using my imagination to create reality, basically, and understanding that, and sort of integrating that into how I see things. I feel like the reason why I gravitated toward Christian mysticism and Neville Goddard, and why it piqued my interest enough for me to really dive into it, and I have been having challenges with it, but also success. I mean, I don't know, both, either. I don't know. But the reason why I dove pretty deeply into that is, I think, because Christian mysticism, particularly in the New Thought sense and in the way that Neville Goddard talks about and writes about, it feels like to be an aspect of what I feel like is my Vajrayana path, which is that, like, in my Vajrayana path, recognizing my desires, my cravings even, as sacred and as part of showing me the way, means that I need practices that help me to experience how sacred they are. And I think the teachings from Neville Goddard help me to do that. And I'm seeing that now. I've come across that idea a bunch of times, but I haven't really been able to express it like this. So, yeah, so I think I'm engaging more deeply in my practices. I'm not forgetting the fundamentals, basically. I never want to forget the fundamentals. The fundamentals make me feel so grounded, but I'm also going more deeply in. I'm going deeper into the waters. My boat is adding new parts to it. It's getting bigger. It's getting more rugged, maybe. It's getting more robust. I'm figuring things out more quickly that don't need to be figured out, maybe I should say, and just allowing them to get figured out. It's that spiral thing that I talked about from the beginning. So that's where I'm at now. I'm doing okay. If you reached out to me or talked to me about it after the last episode, I really appreciate it. So much love. I really, 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 really appreciate you listening and just having care for my well-being, because ultimately that's care for your well-being in a beautiful way. So, damn. What a great episode. Holy shit. I thought I was going to do like 30 minutes, but this ended up being nice and long, almost an hour. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. All I want to say now is, if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy my creativity, if you enjoy my experiences, hearing about them, thinking about them, if you feel like it benefits you in any kind of a way, I would definitely encourage you to support me and what I do in sort of the sanctuary, sacred space that I have, which is just my Patreon. But it really is a sacred space for me. It's a place where I get to share parts of myself, both in the podcast, but also in the demos I make, and the music I make, and the graphics I make, that is really sincere and is coming from a place where it's just what I make, and feeling like I don't have to polish it up perfectly to show you, because you're there to experience what I have to offer. And I think what I have to offer is pretty good. So anyway, so if you want to check me out on Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/jackintheway. But you probably know that by now. Yeah, what else? I love you. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful week. I'll see you next week. Who knows what I'll be talking about, but I'm sure it'll be good. It'll be fun. It'll be beneficial to me, and I really appreciate you listening. All right. Here's to remembering who we are. Peace.